Thank you very much. Sorry, my name's not George, but he sent me instead. So I don't know how many of you know much about Safe Landing. We're a group of current and former aviation professionals, so from within the sector. I'm a former airline pilot. I stopped flying about 5 years ago. I haven't stepped on a plane since. And I'm going to do a slightly unusual thing for an event like this and tell you how much I love flying. I've wanted to be a pilot since I was 5 years old. My grandfather was a pilot, my dad was a pilot. I love what aviation brings. I love the technology. I find it very exciting. I think planes are cool. It took me a long time to get to where I got to. I had to take a lot of debt. It wasn't an easy journey to get there. At some point along that journey, I became very interested in understanding the way in which our minds work, and it becomes part of an inherent part of flight training. We have to understand the biases that are at play in our mind, because if we don't, it can endanger flight safety. An example, we understand about cognitive bias, confirmation bias, which is when our brain seeks information to confirm what we already believe, what we want to believe, and that's really dangerous. If you're flying along and we got the indication you might have a fuel leak, we are inclined to want to look for reasons why we don't have a fuel leak, because it's really inconvenient to have a fuel leak. You have to divert all these different annoying things that cost a lot of money, but you have to train your brain to look for reasons why you might have a fuel leak, because that's the safer thing to do. What I realized at some point along the way was that myself and so many people are doing the same thing on a broader scale. We hear the science, but it's so easy to look for reasons why it's okay. And for a long time, I was sort of saying to people, yes, of course, aviation, we burn all the fuel, but it's only 2.5% of global CO2 emissions. There's no other viable means of doing what we do, and they're justifying it in that way. And at some point, I became interested in perhaps what cognitive biases were at play in my mind. Why am I looking for information to confirm why I want to do this thing I've wanted to do my whole life, and ignoring the fact that it's just simply not consistent with a livable future for my children and for all life that enjoys this amazing planet. So I started to imagine what it would be like if I looked through a lens that wasn't filtered by that bias. What do I actually think? And all of a sudden you present a different number. It's not 2.5%. As we know, it's 5 to 6% of global impact on global heating. And, of course, within a given year, about 5% of the world's population set foot on a plane, less than 20% of the world have ever set foot on a plane. All of a sudden now those numbers seem really different, and as we've heard already, the vast majority of emissions are coming from a very, very a small percentage of the world, and it's just massively unfair. And what I was seeing was a direction from the industry that just wasn't consistent with what we needed to achieve. I was hearing stuff about offsets, which just simply don't do anything. I was hearing stuff about technology that doesn't exist. I was hearing stuff about sustainable fuels, which just simply aren't viable anywhere near the scale we need them to be. I was hearing we were applauding airlines and the industry for 15% improvements in efficiency while seeing 50% increases in traffic numbers. And it just wasn't, I couldn't get my head around it. And for me, it just wasn't something I was comfortable with, so I decided to not be a part of it anymore. Safe Landing is something that's evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. People like me, many people who have left the profession as pilots, as engineers, as air traffic controllers, some who are still within, trying to make a genuine difference. The point is, we also need to do this for the workers. We need to understand what a just transition looks like. We've got a lot of people who work in this profession who actually, at a deep level, do care. And the vast majority don't want to see our planet in not that many decades get to a point where we simply can't inhabit it the way we do now. But they also don't want to see an industry that crashes off a cliff. If we just have this uncontrolled growth, these airport expansions, we just continue to grow in the way we are, it just isn't viable. We're going to keep growing, we're going to keep growing, we're going to keep growing. Not only is that going to destroy the places that we're flying to, not only is it going to mean that we don't have this livable future, but it's also going to mean that you have hundreds of thousands of people working in the sector around the world who are suddenly going to not have a future, a career, any prospects at all. So what we're trying to do is engage workers within the profession in what's called workers' assemblies. We had a very successful one in Bristol a while ago, where you actually give people in the profession a chance to understand, to talk about the science that's available to us, the information that's available to us, understand what future they actually want to see for our planet, but for the profession as well. And actually what's amazing is you get very different answers. When you ask people who work in the sector, not necessarily people like myself who decided to leave the sector, people who want to stay in the sector, when you ask them what they want, they don't want to see what we're seeing right now. Those decisions are being made from people who don't have the best interests of this incredible planet, or the sector itself. So we need to see a huge shift in the way in which we're approaching decisions that are being made, policies that are being made at an airline level, within organisations, within airlines, within regulators, with trade unions, and that's what we're working for. But for me, fundamentally, I just want to share my story, and a lot of the time, just telling people what I've done, why I've done it, without necessarily telling them what they should do, is sometimes one of the most powerful ways of helping people to think differently. So, so that's my story. That's who we are at Safe Landing. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me.